Thunder, Knicks, Clippers, Kings.
Clippers. Let's get that one out of the way.
Okay, so Clippers is a little bit easier, in my opinion. The Clippers offseason is basically contingent upon two things. Does Paul George resign? Does James Harden resign?
Yep.
I've heard more that like, and this does not come from like inside info, but it feels like just from like the outside looking in based on the reporting, it feels like Harden is probably going to go back there, right? Like I haven't heard anybody like trying to get James Harden. I haven't heard any like,
sure. Yeah.
Whatever about that. Paul George, it feels like, is hitting free agency. The reporting is like a little bit mixed in terms of like, are they offering him a max? Like how many years are they offering for him? Like it feels like a more interesting conversation potentially. And there are teams like Philadelphia, for instance, that could desperately use Paul George. So
yeah.
This is
what
just
do we
where we're
think
at.
here?
Like, what do we think? Yeah, like Paul George is the key guy.
Is this coming down to the years? Like I'm confused on this because Kawhi signed his. It seemed like they were going to line all of these guys up. And is this Paul just like, hey, I want another year on mine? I want a little bit more. I mean, Paul's actually a year older than Kawhi. So this is very interesting to me. Ultimately, I feel like both of these guys end up staying in LA because it seems like that's where they both want to be. But yeah, like every day that passes, we don't get something. The closer we get to free agency, the more rumors we hear, the more I start to buy it a little bit. Do the Clippers, like, I feel like the Clippers have to give him eventually what he wants, right? Like they can't afford to just let him walk.
I don't think they have any leverage here unless it's a sign and trade. And the problem with that is that the Sixers, for instance, don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Like there's no real reason for them to go about that right now. They could, not sign and trade for Paul George and continue to just go down the road of building their roster out in free agency. Now, like one way that they could theoretically do it is that they could stay over, like if the Sixers wanted Paul George, right? They could theoretically stay over the cap, I believe, by executing like some crazy complicated sign and trade with the Clippers. But the problem is that like the Clippers, I believe, are not able to execute sign and trades where they take players back because they're over the second apron.
Over the second.
So like this, the end result of all of this to me is just like the Clippers have no leverage here. They just have to give Paul George what he wants. Yeah. And I get it that like you might not want to pay Paul George 3 years, $150 million. But I think you have to pay Paul George 3 years, $150 million. And by the way, I thought Paul George was freaking awesome this year and was worthy of a max contract. I get it that like maybe the organization feels a little bit stale because Kawhi and Paul have been there for 4 years now, haven't won anything yet. It's been tough. I kind of think you've run out of options here. Like you don't have another choice. This is the corner you've put yourself in a lot of ways.
I agree 100%. Whenever you gave Kawhi the extension, you put yourself in that corner even more. And here's the thing, like, I don't know that I disagree with that corner, especially considering the new arena they're about to open next year. You don't want to go full rebuild this offseason when you're about to open a brand new arena that you put all this money into. So I don't blame them for going down this path. I don't love them being in a situation where they could be paying, 2 years from now, that would be, 3 years from now, that'd be 36-year-old, 37-year-old. And where's James Harden? How old is James? 37, 38-year-old. Like those three guys are going to be upper 30s 2-3 years from now. But again, what else are they going to do? I don't see the path. And so what do the Clippers play right now, Sam? Like, do they think they have enough leverage to keep an extra year off the table? Why are they trying to play hardball here? I don't understand.
That's a little bit of what I'm struggling with too. When Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were on the court together this year, they played 1,600 minutes. Do you know what their net rating was?
Plus 12.
They were plus 12.4 when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were out there. The problem was when anybody else was out there. When Paul George was out there without Kawhi, it was plus 2.5. When Kawhi was out there without Paul George, it was minus 1.6. Do you know what it was in the 744 minutes they played without Paul George and without Kawhi Leonard?
Negative 12.
Negative 11 points per 100 possessions. The problem is not these two. Now, you could say that the problem is that you can't actually like build a roster without or while paying all of these guys, James included, right?
Fair.
But the Kawhi Paul George thing works.
Yeah.
And I think that given where your situation is, where you gave up as much as you did to go pair these two together, and you're still at like a relative draft pick deficit moving forward, they owe, I believe, Oklahoma City their pick in 2026. They owe Philadelphia their pick in 2028. And then they have, I think, a swap, like a bad pick swap in their favor. Like against their favor, I mean, where they'd get the worst of the 76ers pick in 2029. And then they had the swap next year as well with Oklahoma City.
Yep.
Where even if they're bad again next year, like Oklahoma City is going to be good. So you're fucked there. So like, I think you're in a place where you really need to just continue down this road. And that's the reality. And like, by the way, James Harden was good this year too. Like I thought James played really well, and getting another year of synergy between those three, if they can stay healthy, that's probably your best bet. Now, the next question to ask here is, before we go down the road of if Paul leaves, right? And I don't want to spend a crazy amount of time on that because I still think it's difficult to imagine, but let's do this a different way first.
Okay.
If Paul stays and if James stays, you have Norman Powell, 2 years, $40 million. You have Terrence Mann, 1 year, $11 million. You have Zubats, 1 year, $12 million. I thought Zubats was like a league average starting center this year and was freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Amir Coffey, 1 year, $4 million. Bones Highland, 1 year, $4 million. You have the Kobe White pick from last year, or Kobe Brown pick. Good Lord. From last year that, they didn't really get a lot out of him this year. And then you have Russell Westbrook at $4 million. I do think that this team is ripe for like some shakeups around those guys. Like if you could find a taker for Norman Powell, who by the way was like pretty good this year.
Yeah.
Like if you could find a way to maybe move like a Norman Powell for something else that's like a little bit, different, or maybe like multiple pieces in
That's
some
what I was
way.
gonna say. Could you turn his $20 million into two $10 million players in that way? Like that would be interesting to me.
Yeah, and Norman Powell, for what it's worth, averaged 14 points in 26 minutes this year, shooting 49, 44, 83.
Yeah.
So like a perfect sixth man. If you could find a taker for that deal, it would be very important, I think, for them moving forward.
I wonder, what do you think about an influx of energy of some sort? Like, I know this is a team that's ready to win, but there's also times, like I thought when Russell Westbrook came on the floor, you could see the energy change in those games. And so I wonder if they're a team that, do they need to maybe just take a chance on some young guys? Like you move Norman Powell for a couple of young guys that are going to come in with just a crazy amount of energy and enthusiasm and help you get through that 82 game slog of a regular season. And you hope they're there for you in the playoffs. Like, I don't know if I love that idea. I don't know if that fits well with the older group, but sometimes I didn't love the energy that they had all the time. And the fact that Russ it stood out so much. I wonder if maybe they don't have to be young guys, maybe just guys that play that way in general. But that's what I would look for is some guys that bring some juice off the bench.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other thing though, is that those guys probably have to shoot because
Yes.
Zubats does not shoot.
Sure.
Right. And you need a backup center because Mason Plumlee is a free agent. The final thing I want to note here is Terrence Mann. Terrence Mann has a 1 year, $11 million deal, basically. Terrence Mann, to me, is the guy that you could move and like get real value for.
Sure.
I think that there are a number of teams, you know, from Boston on through any contender that would adore having Terrence Mann on their team. The Clippers adore having Terrence Mann on their team for obvious reasons, because he's a really good basketball player. He is extension eligible this year. I would think that you can get a deal done with him extension wise. Like, I don't think he's so good as to where like you won't be able to find a number that makes sense.
Yeah.
Even with like what they're limited to.
Sure.
If he doesn't agree to that extension, I actually do wonder if you look to move him, because if you lose him like next offseason somehow, you are like really actually in a lot of trouble. Then.
Yeah, that's like when, you know, the Bruce Brown leaving Denver situation, right? Where like they literally couldn't match what he was being offered on the open market, and you lose him for nothing. So that makes a little bit of sense to me. I would go down the path of trying to get him an extension, assuming, you know, him and his representation are being reasonable with it. You know, if you're already in the second apron, like what's a little bit more for, you know, Steve Ballmer, but I think if it's reasonable, you try to do that. If not, I think what you're saying makes a little bit more sense. Maybe that's the piece that you move to try to shake things up.
Okay. Now, like if Paul George does not resign,
I don't know.
I actually don't know what they do. Like, do you try and tear this down if Paul George leaves?
So if he leaves, you just not re-sign James and you trade Kawhi?
If Paul George was to leave, I think you might actually have to trade Kawhi at that point. Because like, here's the other thing. If Paul George leaves, like, I would assume James Harden will want to stay, because James Harden like had a great year this year, and you know, it's home. Like, that's the thing. It's home for all these guys. Yeah. Like all three of these dudes are from LA. Like, to me, it just makes all the sense in the world for them to stay, which is why I don't want to spend a crazy amount of time on this.
Yeah.
I just say it like, I said this on Twitter last night, freaking Gary Parrish. I say all this to say, if Paul George, and I love GP, like nobody has helped me more in my career. Like, I love Gary. I say this out of love, but I say this to say because of Gary. I wonder if he does not resign, if we do see like a full scale, like we might have to try and tear this down. But again, like you mentioned, they have a new arena with all these toilets coming in.
Yeah.
Steve Ballmer's pumped about the toilets. Can we really like rebuild this with all these toilets coming in?
It's tough to sell tickets for a team that doesn't have a star at all. Then I wonder, I mean, they would have no mechanism to build the roster out still, right? Like, even if you said, all right, we're going to build around Kawhi and James, if Paul George walks, like, their salary cap situation still isn't in a place where they're really adding, you know, I would assume that they're still not able to add real talent. I don't know how far that gets.
I think if that was to happen, what the move would be is to basically do like a gap year where you have Kawhi signed, James signed.
Yep.
And then you try to move Norman Powell for, you have Kawhi signed, James signed. Let's assume James is like 40 million, like in that ballpark. That seems right to me. That's 90. You move Powell for like expiring deals after next season.
Sure.
And then you still try and extend Terrence Mann for like, you know, 20 million, or, you know, the number might be like 18 or whatever the number is. Right. So you're at 108 then, and you have max cap space going into a summer where the cap is projected at 155. I think that you'd probably just take a gap year if he was to leave, basically.
Yeah.
And go about it that way.
I agree with that. I think because you look at their 2025, 26 books, and if you don't add Paul George to this, and you feel like you could move Kawhi or James, or they're part of it after that, and then you make your play there. So I think they have to do that because of the arena. Like you have to sell tickets, and I would assume that Kawhi and James would still sell tickets enough to keep you happy. Where if you move off from those guys and it's all young guys and future draft picks, like that's not putting butts in the seats. So or on the toilets that apparently are incredible.
Hey man, these toilets are real. I tried to find the clip of Steve Ballmer yelling toilets. It's truly like an all-time like best clips in basketball. Steve Ballmer in a hard hat yelling toilets. My guy's pumped. Okay. I'm sure Clippers fans will want to hear like who we think they should chase like in free agency. I mean, like it's tricky. Like you're obviously looking at like minimum scale guys, right? Like you're not out here, hunting at the top of the free agency market. I mean, look, Russell Westbrook, like they have to figure out what's going to happen with Russ.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a player option, right?
Player option of $4 million. Does he stay? Does he go? We'll see what that looks like. I mean, like a guy for them, I don't know what Precious Achua is going to get in free agency, but like, I like that idea for them as like an energy big that you kind of referenced, right? That would be like an interesting, smart move for them. Beyond that, you're kind of looking at, veterans that are minimums, right? Like, it's like I don't know if Josh Okogie like declines his player option.
That was the name that I literally just scrolled by that jumped out at least a little bit.
Yeah, it's just really hard to find like guys that I think would be real, true like difference makers. The Lakers, had to deal with this last offseason, right? Where they go out and they sign like Cam Reddish and Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood, and none of those guys really made a difference.
The Suns just tried it too and it didn't work. Like
it's really hard to find these guys. It's really, really freaking hard to go out and find.
Oubre's the guy players for the Sixers, right? That worked out.
Yeah. Like Kessler Edwards is a name that I like. I think he has a chance to be like a decent, like 3-and-D, particularly defensive wing. Xavier Tillman. But I think Xavier is probably going to get like a little bit more money than what they're going to be able to offer. And again, like if you lose Paul George, we're assuming they keep Paul George in this circumstance, I guess. But like, it becomes pretty tricky and difficult. And then you're on like the Spencer Dinwiddie, like vets, right? Goga Batadze, I think would be like a really good backup, like center that fits perfectly with Ivica Zubac. But those are the kind of names I think we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.